I still remember the day I stumbled upon an ancient tome that would change my life forever. It was a dusty, forgotten bookshop in the heart of the city, its shelves stacked with volumes that seemed to whisper secrets to each other as I browsed through them. The store's owner, an old man with sunken eyes and skin like parchment, watched me with an intensity that made me feel like he could see right through me. He handed me a book bound in black leather, adorned with strange symbols that seemed to shift and writhe like living things. "This one's been waiting for you," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "The Lesser Key of Solomon." I took the book home, feeling an odd sense of excitement mixed with trepidation. As I opened the cover, a musty smell wafted out, and I was hit with a wave of fatigue that seemed to wash over me like a cold tide. The pages were filled with intricate illustrations and cryptic symbols, each one more bizarre than the last. I spent hours poring over the book, trying to make sense of its arcane language and diagrams. It wasn't until I stumbled upon a passage that spoke of the 5 elements that I felt a shiver run down my spine. The elements were said to be the building blocks of creation itself, and the key to unlocking their secrets lay hidden within the Lesser Key's pages. I was hooked. Little did I know, I had just opened Pandora's box. And I've always been drawn to the unknown, the unexplained, and the forbidden. It's what led me to the dusty bookshop on that fateful day. The store's owner, with his sunken eyes and parchment-like skin, seemed to sense my fascination with the occult. He watched me with an unnerving intensity as I browsed through the shelves, my fingers trailing over the spines of ancient tomes. The air was thick with the scent of old books and decay. I felt like I was being herded towards something, but I couldn't quite put my finger on what it was. I stopped in front of a shelf that seemed to be emitting a faint hum, as if the books themselves were vibrating with energy. The owner's eyes locked onto mine, and he nodded almost imperceptibly. I scanned the shelves, my fingers trailing over the spines until they came to rest on a book bound in black leather. It was the same one the old man had handed me earlier. I opened it, and a musty smell wafted out, carrying with it whispers of the past. I felt a shiver run down my spine as I flipped through the pages, my eyes scanning the intricate illustrations and cryptic symbols. The book seemed to be watching me, its pages whispering secrets in a language I couldn't quite understand. The old man appeared beside me, his eyes glinting with an otherworldly intensity. "You found it," he said, his voice low and gravelly. "The Lesser Key of Solomon." I felt a jolt of excitement mixed with trepidation. What had I just gotten myself into? The book seemed to be pulsing with energy, as if it was alive and waiting for me to unlock its secrets. I took the book home, feeling a sense of anticipation building inside me. As I opened the cover, the air around me seemed to thicken, as if the very fabric of reality was shifting to accommodate the forbidden knowledge contained within. I knew then that my life would never be the same again. I spent the next few days poring over the book, taking notes and making copies of the relevant pages. The language was archaic, but I was determined to unlock its secrets. At first, it seemed like a simple matter of deciphering ancient texts, but as I delved deeper into the book's pages, I began to realize that something was off. The illustrations were incredibly detailed, depicting creatures and beings that defied explanation. They seemed to shift and writhe on the page like living things. I tried to focus on the text itself, but my eyes kept straying back to the pictures. They seemed to be watching me, their gaze piercing through the pages. I spent hours researching the various figures and entities depicted in the book. The Gosha, the Ashmedai, the Simurgh, each one was more bizarre than the last. I found myself becoming increasingly obsessed with the book, spending every waking moment studying its pages. My friends and family began to worry about me, but I couldn't tear myself away from the book's secrets. I discovered that the Lesser Key of Solomon was said to contain the names of 72 demons, each one bound to a specific element or virtue. The book promised that by invoking these demons, one could gain immense power and knowledge. But as I delved deeper into the text, I began to realize that this was no ordinary book. It seemed to be hiding secrets beneath its surface, secrets that only a select few had ever uncovered. I started to experience strange visions and nightmares, as if the book's dark energy was seeping into my mind. I would see shadowy figures lurking in the corners of my eye, their presence always just out of sight. I began to wonder if I had made a terrible mistake, if I had unleashed a power that I couldn't control. I tried to shake off the feeling of unease, telling myself it was just my imagination playing tricks on me. But deep down, I knew that something was very wrong. The book had awakened something within me, something that threatened to consume me whole. I spent the next few days studying the book's symbols and codes, trying to decipher their meaning. The illustrations were becoming increasingly vivid in my mind's eye, as if they were seared into my brain. I saw the image of a pentagram etched into the page, surrounded by strange symbols that seemed to pulse with a malevolent energy. I felt a shiver run down my spine as I realized that this was no ordinary symbol. It was a sigil, a key to unlocking a doorway to other realms. The book promised that by invoking the correct sequence of these symbols, one could access hidden knowledge and gain immense power. But as I delved deeper into the text, I began to realize that this was no simple puzzle. The codes were complex, requiring months or even years of study to unlock their secrets. I discovered a hidden compartment deep within the book's pages, containing a series of cryptic letters and diagrams. They seemed to be written in an ancient language, one that I couldn't quite decipher. But as I studied them, I began to feel a creeping sense of unease. The diagrams depicted dark rituals and human sacrifices, while the letters spoke of forbidden knowledge and unspeakable horrors. It was as if the book was trying to tell me something, but in a language that I couldn't understand. I started to experience vivid nightmares, filled with images of darkness and despair. I would wake up in the middle of the night, my heart pounding with fear, wondering what terrible secrets the book had revealed to me. My friends and family began to worry about me, but I couldn't tear myself away from the book's pages. I was addicted to its secrets, even if they were driving me slowly mad. I knew then that I had to be careful. The book was playing with fire and I was the one holding the match, but I couldn't help myself. I was drawn to it like a moth to flame, helpless to resist its dark allure. I was alone in my room, surrounded by books and papers, when I first heard the whispering voice. It was soft at first, almost imperceptible, but as the moments passed, it grew louder and more insistent. The voice seemed to come from all around me, echoing off the walls and ceiling, making it impossible to pinpoint its source. I felt a shiver run down my spine as I realized that the voice was speaking directly to me. I tried to focus on my work, but the voice was relentless. It whispered names and words in my ear, tempting me with secrets and knowledge. I felt like I was being drawn into some dark and ancient world, one that few people ever got to experience. I tried to ignore the voice, but it only grew louder and more insistent. It began to whisper in my ear at night when I was asleep, and even when I was awake. The words were always just out of reach, tantalizing me with promises of power and knowledge. I felt like I was being pulled down a rabbit hole, one that I couldn't climb back up from. I started to feel like I was losing my grip on reality. The voice was taking over my mind, whispering lies and half-truths in my ear. I knew it wasn't real, but the voice made me believe otherwise. It told me that I was special, that I had a destiny to fulfill, and that the secrets of the universe were waiting for me. I felt like I was trapped in some kind of nightmare, with no escape from the whispering voice. But at the same time, I was drawn to it, like a moth to flame. The voice promised me power and knowledge beyond my wildest dreams, and I couldn't resist its allure. As the days passed, my obsession with the book grew stronger. I spent every waking moment studying its pages, poring over the symbols and codes that seemed to hold the secrets of the universe. The whispering voice in my ear grew louder and more insistent, urging me on as I delved deeper into the book's mysteries. I began to neglect my daily routine, skipping meals and ignoring my friends and family. They tried to intervene, but I couldn't be swayed. The book had become my sole focus, and I was determined to unlock its secrets at any cost. I started to experience strange visions and hallucinations, as if the book's secrets were flooding into my mind like a tidal wave. I saw flashes of ancient rituals and forbidden knowledge, and felt myself being drawn into a world of madness and despair. I knew that I was losing myself in the process, but I couldn't stop. The book had become a siren's call, luring me deeper into the depths of insanity with every passing day. I was trapped in a never-ending cycle of obsession and desire, with no escape from the abyss that yawned before me. I started to write in the margins of the book, pouring out my own thoughts and feelings onto the pages. The words flowed from me like blood from a wound, as if the book was somehow channeling my madness into its own dark energy. The whispering voice grew louder still, until I could feel it pulsating through every cell of my body. It was no longer just a voice in my ear. It was a living, breathing thing that surrounded me on all sides. I knew that I was becoming one with the book, merging with its secrets and power into some kind of twisted fusion. I felt myself slipping further and further down the rabbit hole, deeper into the depths of madness and despair. The world around me grew distorted and surreal, as if reality itself was bending to accommodate my growing obsession with the book. And yet, I couldn't stop. I was addicted to the secrets that the book held, and I would do anything at all to unlock its next hidden truth. As I delved deeper into the book's secrets, I became increasingly convinced that it held the key to unlocking a powerful entity. The whispering voice in my ear grew more urgent, urging me on as I prepared for the summoning ritual. I spent days researching and preparing, poring over ancient texts and gathering rare ingredients for the incantation. My apartment began to resemble a makeshift temple, with candles, herbs, and strange artifacts scattered about. The air was thick with anticipation, and I could feel the weight of my own ambition bearing down on me. I finally felt ready to begin the ritual. I lit the candles, recited the words of the incantation, and waited for the entity to respond. At first, there was nothing, just silence and darkness. But then, a faint hum began to build in intensity, like the buzzing of 1,000 bees. The air seemed to vibrate with energy, and I could feel my own heart pounding in time with the beat. I took a deep breath and continued with the ritual, feeling myself being drawn into a vortex of power and madness. The room around me began to distort and blur, as if reality itself was warping to accommodate the entity's presence. I felt myself being pulled apart and put back together again, my very soul trembling with anticipation. I called out into the void, asking the entity to manifest before me. And then, in an instant, everything changed. The candles flickered and died, plunging me into darkness. The hum ceased, leaving only an oppressive silence in its wake. I was left standing alone, surrounded by an unsettling stillness. And then a presence coalesced before me, a being of twisted, nightmarish beauty, its eyes blazing with malevolent power. I knew in that moment that I had made a terrible mistake. The entity was not what I had expected. It was something far, far worse. Its presence filled me with a creeping sense of dread, and I realized that I had unleashed a horror beyond comprehension upon the world. As the days passed, my obsession with the entity grew stronger. I became increasingly consumed by my research and neglect of reality. My apartment was now a shrine to the book's dark power, with strange artifacts and relics scattered about. The air was thick with the scent of incense and something else, a sweet, sickly smell that seemed to cling to me like a shroud. I spent every waking moment poring over ancient texts and conducting twisted experiments in an attempt to understand the entity's true nature. My mind became a jumble of fragmented thoughts and half-remembered dreams, as if the very fabric of reality was unraveling before my eyes. I ignored the warning signs, the strange noises at night, the feeling of being watched by unseen eyes, the creeping sense of dread that seemed to seep into every pore of my being. I knew that I was playing with forces beyond my control, but I couldn't stop myself. The entity had become an all-consuming force in my life, driving me forward with a relentless, malevolent energy. I began to neglect my physical health, surviving on a diet of stale air and bitter coffee. My clothes were tattered and stained, my hair wild and unkempt. But I didn't care. I was too far gone to worry about the mundane concerns of the living. I knew that I was losing myself in the process, but I couldn't stop. The entity had become a part of me, a dark and twisted companion that fed on my fear and desire for knowledge. And yet, despite the creeping sense of madness that threatened to consume me whole, I felt alive, more alive than I had ever felt before. I was trapped in a living nightmare, with no escape from the horrors that lurked within the pages of the book. But I knew that I would keep reading, keep searching for answers, until the very end. For in the depths of that twisted, nightmarish world, I knew that I would find my true home and my ultimate destruction. I felt myself slipping further and further away from reality, my grip on sanity beginning to slip like sand between my fingers. The world around me had become a surreal dreamscape, where the laws of physics no longer applied, and the boundaries between reality and madness were blurred beyond recognition. I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched by unseen eyes, that the entity was closing in on me with an unrelenting pace. Every creak of the floorboards, every groan of the old wooden beams, made me jump with terror. I knew that I had to get out of there, but my legs felt heavy and unresponsive, as if rooted to the spot. I tried to focus on my breathing, to calm my racing heart and clear my mind. But it was no use. The entity's presence was all around me, a palpable force that seemed to seep into every pore of my being. I could feel its eyes on me, boring into my skin like cold, dead weights. I knew that I had to escape, but my body felt leaden and uncooperative. I stumbled forward, blindly feeling my way through the darkness, desperate to find a way out of this living nightmare. But every door I opened led only to more terrors, more horrors that seemed to spring from the very walls themselves. I was trapped in a world of madness, with no escape from the entity's wrath. And yet, despite the terror that gripped my heart, I felt a twisted sense of exhilaration. I was alive, truly alive, for the first time in what felt like an eternity. The world around me was a madhouse, but I was the king of this twisted realm. I stumbled and fell, skinning my knee on the cold floor. But I didn't cry out. Instead, I laughed, a wild, hysterical sound that seemed to shake the very foundations of the house. For in that moment, I knew that I had found my true home, a place where the laws of reality no longer applied and the only rule was survival. And I was ready to play by those rules. I finally stumbled upon the truth about the entity, and it was more terrifying than I could have ever imagined. The being before me was not a creature from another realm, but a manifestation of my own darkest desires. It was a reflection of the deepest fears that lurked within my own mind, a physical representation of the darkness that had been growing inside me for so long. I saw that the entity's true form was that of a twisted, humanoid figure with skin like dark, polished wood and eyes that burned with an inner fire. Its presence seemed to fill the entire room, casting a shadow over everything it touched. And yet, despite its monstrous appearance, I felt a twisted sense of recognition, as if I had finally found a part of myself that I had been trying to suppress. I realized that the entity was not just a being from another realm, but a manifestation of my own psyche. It was a representation of the darkest corners of my own mind, a physical embodiment of the fears and desires that I had tried to keep hidden. And in that moment, I knew that I had unleashed a horror beyond comprehension upon the world. I felt a wave of despair wash over me, as if I had finally lost all control. The entity seemed to sense my fear, and it began to laugh, a sound that was both beautiful and terrifying, like the music of the damned. I knew that I had made a terrible mistake, that I had unleashed a horror upon the world that would never be contained. I tried to speak, to beg for mercy or forgiveness, but my voice was frozen in my throat. The entity's laughter grew louder, more maniacal, and I felt myself being drawn closer and closer until I was staring into its twisted face. And in that moment, I knew that I was doomed. I knew that I had to confront the dark forces head-on if I wanted to survive. The entity before me seemed to be growing stronger by the second, its power spreading like a contagion through the air. I could feel its presence seeping into my bones, corroding my very soul. I steeled myself for the battle ahead, knowing that it would be a fight for my very existence. I raised my hands, and a surge of energy burst forth from my fingertips, illuminating the darkened room with a faint blue glow. I took a deep breath, steeling myself for what was to come. The entity began to laugh again, its voice like thunder in my ears. It was a sound that seemed to shake the very foundations of reality, and I felt my knees buckle beneath me. But I refused to give in. I gritted my teeth, focusing all my willpower on the task at hand. I launched myself forward, determined to confront the entity head-on. The air around me seemed to distort and ripple as I moved, as if the very fabric of reality was being torn apart by our conflict. The entity met me with a wave of its own dark energy, and we clashed in a spectacular display of light and sound. I felt myself being flung across the room, slamming into the wall with a force that left me breathless. But I refused to yield. I struggled to my feet, determination burning within me like a fire. The entity was relentless, however, and it pressed its attack with renewed ferocity. We battled on, our energies locked in a struggle that seemed to go on forever. I began to feel the weight of my own mortality, as if the very fabric of reality was being pulled apart by our conflict. But I refused to give in. With a surge of adrenaline-fueled determination, I launched myself forward once more, determined to emerge victorious from this desperate bid for survival. I stumbled forward, my legs trembling beneath me as I faced the entity head-on. The air was thick with tension, heavy with the weight of our conflicting energies. The entity loomed before me, its presence seeming to fill the entire room. Its eyes burned with an otherworldly intensity, and I felt myself being drawn inexorably towards them. I tried to speak, but my voice was barely a whisper. My words were lost in the void, consumed by the overwhelming power of the entity's gaze. It was as if I was staring into the very abyss of existence, with no escape from the horrors that lurked within. I felt myself being pulled down into the depths of madness and despair. The entity's presence was like a cold wind, cutting through my defenses and leaving me vulnerable to its attacks. I tried to resist, but it was no use. The entity was too powerful, too entrenched in my psyche. It was as if I had always been destined for this moment, that I had been drawn into this abyss by some unseen force. I felt myself being consumed by the darkness, my mind shattered by the sheer intensity of the entity's power. The last thing I remembered was the sound of my own screams, echoing through the void like a chorus of the damned. I was gone, lost in the depths of the entity's realm, and as I disappeared into the abyss, I knew that I would never be seen again. The entity had won, and I was just another victim in its endless crusade against the living.